I slid my hand across the smooth leather of his briefcase left open on the counter, as if he hadn't cared enough to hide it. Inside, tucked between his planner and a half-folded dress shirt, I found the things that did not belong to me, did not belong to us. A silver tin, its lid flecked with scratches filled with lubricant that caught the light. A blister pack of small blue pills, the edges pressed and neat. A paper napkin folded twice, stained with a lipstick shade I had never worn, and a single blonde hair curled against the fabric like a thread unraveling. My throat closed. I did not shout. I did not slam the lid. I stood in the quiet hum of the refrigerator, listening to the faint tick of the kitchen clock, and I chose. Instead of arguments that would circle like vultures, I reached for what I had already prepared. In the garage, I had kept a vial of brilliant blue dye from the time I tried to save a ruined hem, and a small tincture of pepper I had once made when fear kept me awake. The dye clung to my fingers, metallic and stubborn. The pepper stung at the back of my throat. When I pressed the briefcase closed again, the blue smudge remained on my skin. How far would I go to make the truth visible? I used to believe our life was stitched together by small, ordinary routines, the kind of daily details that seemed too mundane to question. I folded his shirts, always smoothing the collar flat with my palm. I brewed the coffee while he showered, the rich steam filling the kitchen before the day even started. His socks went into neat pairs, his briefcase rested in the same corner of the hallway, and I told myself that consistency meant safety. The creak of the pantry door, the faint lemon scent of his soap, even the scrape of his chair against the hardwood, those were the sounds of belonging. But looking back, I realized the off notes had been playing for a long time, and I had pretended not to hear them. There were nights when a strange text tone woke him at 3 a.m. and he slipped into the bathroom with his phone. I told myself it was work, another deadline. He brought home a new cologne, sharp and floral, not the woodsy scent he'd worn for years. He said a client had gifted it, and I let the explanations settle in me like dust. Business dinners stretched until dawn, yet his eyes carried no weight of long hours, only a distracted glow. Each of these moments was like a picture frame, hung slightly crooked, noticeable but easy to ignore when the room was dim. I told myself stories to bridge the gaps because admitting the truth felt more dangerous than denial. Maybe I feared what would crumble if I tugged too hard at the edges. I remembered my mother smoothing arguments like she smoothed bed sheets, her voice low, her eyes tired. I thought perhaps this was my inheritance, to keep the surface unbroken even when something underneath was splintering. But the denial fractured the day I picked up his tablet from the couch. A message glowed across the lock screen, a name I didn't know paired with a pet word I had never been called. My stomach twisted with the recognition that this was not business, not friendship, but intimacy, stolen and repurposed. It wasn't just the message, it was the small hotel receipt tucked into his wallet later that week, blue ink spelling out a room number and time. The stamp at the bottom blurred, as though even the paper didn't want to keep their secret. In that moment, the picture frame fell. I saw it all: the lipstick smear, the cologne, the absences I had packaged neatly as explanations. I stood with that receipt in my hand, and the world tilted. Why had I convinced myself for so long that silence would protect me? Why had I allowed myself to disappear just to keep him visible? I folded the receipt carefully and slid it into my pocket. Confrontation no longer seemed worth the endless circles of excuses. If I was going to survive this, if I was going to make the truth undeniable, it would have to be done in a way that left no room for him to rewrite what I had seen. That was the moment the plan took root, as steady as breath, as quiet as the ticking clock in our kitchen. I moved through the house with a different kind of silence after that night. Not the silence of denial, but the silence of watching. I learned to notice the way he placed his keys on the counter, heavy and careless, as though he owned the air between us. I listened to the jangle of coins when he shifted his jacket, the way he tucked his phone screen down whenever he set it on the table. I became invisible in my own home, learning to gather small truths without the clash of words. It was not fear that kept me quiet anymore. It was calculation. I checked his calendar when he left his laptop open, noting the strange lunches blocked in gray, the meetings that had no titles. I copied receipts with my phone camera, while I packed lunches for the kids. the glow of the screen lighting my hand as if I were documenting a crime scene. I slipped a single hair of my own into his coat pocket, once dark and curved, and when it never returned, I knew someone else had been close enough to brush it away. Each piece felt like a shard of glass I carried in my pocket, cutting me, but also reminding me I was awake. Late at night, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold, scrolling back through our wedding pictures. I saw myself in that simple white dress, the church quiet, except for the echo of our vows. I wanted to ask that girl if she knew what she was promising, if she understood how invisible she might become. Did I want him to hurt, or did I want to be seen? That question pressed against me like a bruise. The first public hint came on a rainy Thursday. I was scrolling absent-mindedly when I saw an Instagram story from a mutual acquaintance. It showed a hotel bar downtown, dim light, and in the corner, a hand holding a cocktail. Not his face, just the cuff of his sleeve, but I knew it. The fabric was patterned with a faint grid. I had ironed myself the shirt, hanging in our closet, only the night before. Beside his arm, blurred but still visible, a ringed finger with painted nails, a laugh line in the skin of a cheek. My throat closed as if the air had been siphoned from the room. A neon reflection rippled across the glass in the photo, pink and sharp, and it felt like the entire world was pointing to what I had tried not to name. My fingers shook as I held the phone. The dog lifted his head from his bed and looked at me as though he knew something had shifted. I did not scream. I did not call. Instead, I went to the garage where the vial of brilliant blue dye still waited, and I opened the box where I had kept a small bottle of pepper tincture. The scent was sharp bitter. It made my eyes sting. I placed a handkerchief on the counter and tested a single drop. It bloomed across the fabric, a violent flower that clung no matter how hard I scrubbed. The blue spread until the entire square was stained, until it looked like a secret made visible. I folded the handkerchief carefully, slid it into the trash, and wiped my hands on my jeans. My decision was no longer a shadow or a thought. It was an action solid as the glass vial in my palm. The morning I set everything in motion was colder than it should have been for late spring. The kitchen window rattled in the breeze and a faint whistle slipped through the cracked frame. I waited until he had gone, the sound of his car fading into the distance, before I opened the cupboard where I had hidden the vials. The glass caught the light in a way that felt conspiratorial, the liquid inside shifting with each tilt of my hand. The brilliant blue dye looked almost harmless, like water mixed with sunlight, but I knew how stubborn it was. I remembered the hem of my dress I had once tried to fix with it, the way the stain had refused to fade no matter how many times I washed it. The pepper tincture was different. Its smell sharp enough to sting my eyes and burn the back of my throat even before I uncorked it. These two things together felt like truth given form, one to mark what could not be hidden, one to sting until the eyes watered and the breath caught. I lined everything on the counter, his silver tin, the blister pack of pills, my small containers. My hands did not tremble. I worked as though I were measuring ingredients for a recipe, precise, calm, deliberate. I spooned the gel into the tin, swirling the dye until it glowed an unearthly blue. I tapped the edge of the blister pack against the counter, pried open the foil, and replaced the pills with identical capsules I had carefully filled with the same dye, the casing sealed so neatly he would not notice. I wiped the edges clean, smoothed the foil back down, pressed it until the seams looked factory-made. The pepper tincture I dabbed into the gel, mixing it so faintly that it would not reveal itself until skin met skin. I leaned back, breathing in the acrid scent of chemicals, my throat raw, my eyes burning, and I thought, this is what betrayal tastes like. I snapped the containers shut and placed them back into his briefcase exactly as I had found them. The leather creaked softly when I smoothed the flap down as though it were sighing in complicity. I paused, looking at my hand. A streak of blue had smeared across my thumb. I rubbed it against my jeans, but it clung stubbornly, marking me. I stared at that streak until it blurred, wondering if I was branding myself as well. When the briefcase was back in its corner, I walked through the house to erase any trace. I washed the spoons, rinsed the counter, sprayed the air with lemon cleaner to disguise the pepper. Then I sat at the table and listened to the tick of the clock. Each second felt like a drumbeat carrying me closer to the moment I had been dreading and craving in equal measure. That evening he came home distracted, His tie loosened his phone, buzzing every few minutes. He tossed the briefcase onto the chair, kissed the air near my cheek, and muttered something about another business trip tomorrow. I nodded as though my silence was nothing unusual. Inside, my thoughts sharpened. Tomorrow would be the stage, and he had already written his role. I only needed to supply the lighting. I busied myself with small preparations no one else would notice. While he showered, I checked his suitcase, folded his shirts with the same care as always, slipped the receipt from last week into the pocket of my robe to remind myself what was at stake. I imagined him and her in some bland hotel room, believing themselves clever, believing their secret invincible. I imagined the blue blooming across their skin, staining their sheets, searing their eyes, marking them in a way no lie could erase. The night passed in restless fragments. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog, the muffled laughter of a television from the house next door. When dawn broke, pale and unforgiving, he was already in motion, pacing, checking his phone, snapping at the coffee machine. I handed him his briefcase, watching the way his hand closed around the handle, unaware. He left in a rush, his cologne lingering in the hall, sharp and unfamiliar. I stood at the window until his car disappeared around the corner, then sank into the chair he had just vacated. The briefcase's absence left an emptiness in the room that felt almost holy. All day, I moved like someone carrying glass, careful, deliberate. I went to the grocery store, bought apples, milk, bread, nodded at the cashier who had known me for years. My hands shook only once when I reached for a jar of peanut butter and thought of how ordinary everything would look to anyone else. The world had no idea what was unfolding. In the evening, I returned home, cooked dinner for myself, though I barely tasted it, and sat in the quiet with my phone near. I did not text him. I did not call. I waited. The house grew darker, the air heavier. Hours later, his car pulled into the driveway, the engine cutting off abruptly. I heard footsteps, stumbling, laughter, half strangled, and then the door opened. The sight hit me like a surge of electricity. He stood in the hallway, his shirt streaked with stains so vivid they glowed under the porch light. Blue blotches splattered across his collar, his cuffs, his hands. Behind him, she stood, blinking, her blouse soaked with the same indigo, her skin blotched and raw where the pepper tincture had burned. Her eyes watered, mascara streaming blue, streaking her cheekbones like war paint gone wrong. The air smelled acrid, sharp, almost metallic. They froze when they saw me sitting calmly in the chair, hands folded in my lap. Neither spoke at first. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again, his voice hoarse and cracking. She whimpered, clutching at her blouse as though she could pull the blue out of the fabric. The silence stretched until it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. I did not move. I let the sight settle into them, into me, into the walls themselves. For the first time in months, I felt something close to steady. They rushed to the bathroom, their footsteps pounding water, rushing, as they tried to scrub the evidence away. I followed quietly, standing in the doorway. The sink turned cobalt, the water swirling down in violent spirals, the porcelain stained in rings that would not vanish. Their frantic hands only smeared the blue deeper into their skin. The mistress coughed, her eyes, red tears streaming, gasping for air. He cursed under his breath, splashing more water, but the stains clung. I leaned against the frame, watching the chaos, and I thought, this is what the truth looks like when it refuses to be hidden. My heart pounded not with fear, but with a strange, fierce relief. At last, the silence had broken. And yet I knew even then, standing there with the bathroom tiles smeared like a crime scene, that this was not the end. The worst part still waited, hidden beneath papers, receipts, secrets yet to be uncovered. What I had set in motion was only the beginning, and the blue on their skin was just the first layer of what he had tried to bury. The door slammed behind them with a force that rattled the frame, and I stood in the hallway as their voices tangled with the sound of running water. The bathroom light spilled a pale square across the carpet, and inside, I could see their frantic movements. He bent over the sink, splashing water against his shirt, rubbing his hands raw, each motion only smearing the indigo deeper. She pressed tissues to her face, but the dye bled through, streaking her cheeks in uneven rivers. The air was thick with the burn of pepper, sharp enough to make my eyes sting even from where I stood. They did not look like lovers caught in passion. They looked like children who had wandered too far and found themselves trapped. He cursed under his breath, a guttural sound that broke into coughing as the pepper took hold. She whimpered, high-pitched, frantic, her blouse clinging wet against her skin. I leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed, and said nothing. My silence filled the space louder than any accusation. For months, I had been invisible in my own home, erased by his distractions, dismissed by his excuses. Now, for the first time, I was the one he could not ignore. He turned his eyes red, his face splotched with blue streaks that made him look grotesque under the harsh bathroom light. "What did you do?" he demanded, voice low, cracking. I didn't answer. I let the question linger, hanging in the steam until his anger collapsed under its own weight. She gasped, rubbing her arms where the dye had stained the pepper still burning. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, but I offered her nothing. No pity, no words, not even recognition. She had been a shadow in my marriage for too long. Now she was just a stranger marked by her choices. They scrubbed harder, but the stains deepened, blooming like bruises across their skin. The sink was streaked with cobalt lines, the porcelain glowing faintly under the light. Water splashed onto the floor, soaking the bath mat, turning it into a canvas of blotches and streaks. I watched them stumble in their panic, two people unraveling before my eyes. He tried to regain control, barking orders at her, demanding a towel, slamming his hand against the counter when the dye refused to fade. Each motion only made the scene more pitiful. His voice, once commanding, now sounded desperate, almost broken. She sobbed, quietly covering her face with her stained hands. I left them there, stepping back into the hall. My heart was steady, my breath measured. The blue had done what I needed, it had revealed what words could not. But as I turned toward the living room, my eyes fell on his briefcase, still sitting by the door, its leather damp from the rain outside. Something inside me shifted. The blue stains were humiliating, yes, but humiliation was only a surface wound. Betrayal, I knew, ran deeper, and the worst part was still waiting. I walked toward the briefcase, each step deliberate, as if the house itself were urging me forward. I bent down, unlatched the brass clasps, and lifted the flap. Papers spilled out, neatly stacked, smelling faintly of smoke and cologne. I sifted through them with hands that no longer trembled. There, between meeting notes and receipts, was a thin folder marked with his handwriting. My name was nowhere on it. Instead, another name appeared again and again, the mistress's. There were bank transfer slips, small at first, then larger, the numbers rising in careful increments. My chest tightened as I read. Savings accounts drained, joint funds rerouted. The money we had set aside for the children's future had been siphoned, funneled into an account I had never seen. Dates stretched back months, maybe longer. The ink bled slightly where water had touched the page, as if even the paper had wept. I sank into the chair by the door, folder open on my lap, the voices from the bathroom still muffled but frantic. My mind replayed every sacrifice I had made, late nights at work, skipped meals, the quiet scraping to cover bills. I had thought I was holding us together. Instead, he had been dismantling us piece by piece, hiding the evidence in the folds of his briefcase. My throat ached, but no tears came. Rage did not arrive as an explosion, it settled like cold iron, heavy and unyielding. I closed the folder and rose. The house felt strange now, as though its walls had shifted, aligning themselves with the truth. He stumbled from the bathroom shirt, clinging wet against his chest, the blue stains now smeared into grotesque patterns across his skin. His eyes locked on mine, and he froze when he saw the folder in my hand. "That's not what you think," he started, but the words sounded hollow, a script he had rehearsed too many times. I held his gaze until the silence crushed his voice. The mistress lingered behind him, trembling, her hands clasped together, her face a mask of streaked blue and shame. I turned away from both of them and placed the folder on the dining table, its pages spread open like a confession. The room smelled of damp clothes, chemical dye, and the sour tang of fear. He moved closer, but I stepped back, my body rigid, my voice steady when I finally spoke. "You've already lost more than you realize." My words were not a threat. They were a fact. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. She whispered his name, reaching for his sleeve, but he shook her off, his face pale beneath the blotches of indigo. I walked past them, my footsteps slow but certain. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water, the simple act grounding me. The faucet hissed, the glass filled, and I drank slowly while their whispers carried faintly down the hall. Every sound they made felt smaller, now diminished against the weight of what I had uncovered. I thought about the dye swirling in the sink, the blue stains that would cling to their skin for days. But more than that, I thought about the folder on the table, the proof that betrayal had not only been of the body, but of the future. That was the wound no soap could cleanse, no excuses could mask. I stood there in the kitchen, the glass cool in my hand, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a kind of stillness. The truth had been dragged into the open, painted in blue, stamped in ink, undeniable. I was not screaming, not pleading, not begging. I was watching, steady, resolved. And as I set the glass down, the question rose again, quieter now, but clearer. How far would I go to make sure he could never erase me again? The morning after felt heavier than any storm I had ever lived through. The house smelled of bleach from their late-night scrubbing, yet faint rings of blue still clung to the porcelain, a stubborn reminder of what had been exposed. He moved around the kitchen in silence, his eyes swollen, his shirt buttoned high to hide the stains that wouldn't wash out. I sat at the table with the folder spread before me, the bank transfers staring back like open wounds. He tried to speak half-formed words, catching in his throat, but I raised a hand and the silence pressed him back. The children padded into the room, rubbing their eyes, sensing something was wrong, though no one explained. They stared at the blue smear still visible on his wrist, then looked at me as if waiting for translation. I said nothing. By mid-morning, the phone began to ring. A client wanted to know why he had missed a call. Then another voice asked about a strange incident at a hotel. Gossip had moved faster than we could. A neighbor stopped me at the mailbox, eyebrows raised, tone falsely sympathetic, and I understood how quickly humiliation could travel. But humiliation wasn't what gutted me most. It was the betrayal inked on those transfer slips, the slow theft of our future. While he paced and muttered about fixing things, I drove to the bank. The marble lobby was cool, the air crisp with paper and polish. I slid documents across the desk to a young woman who didn't flinch when I said I needed accounts frozen. Her stamp fell like a gavel, each thud a small reclaiming of power. At the lawyer's office, I laid the folder down and listened as she explained what could be secured, what could be salvaged. Her calm voice steadied me, her pen scratching across the page, sounding like a thread being pulled free. When I left, the weight in my chest had shifted. It was no longer the crushing weight of helplessness, but the solid weight of resolve. That night, he tried to argue, to twist words, but I had already taken the steps he could not undo. The blue had marked his skin. The papers had marked his guilt. I poured myself tea, steam rising soft in the lamplight, and let the quiet hold me. For once, I was not the one scrambling to protect us. I was the one setting boundaries, unshakable, immovable, finally visible. The first small victory came quietly, without ceremony. A letter from the bank arrived confirming the freeze on our joint account, my name standing alone as the safeguarded owner. I held it in my hands, the paper smooth and sharp at the edges, and for the first time in months, I felt something solid beneath my feet. That night, I unlocked the front door with a new set of keys he no longer carried. The click of the lock was a sound of my own choosing. I gathered the sweater I had stained, while testing the dye, its hem ruined by that indigo bloom. Instead of discarding it, I cut the fabric into a small square, stitched it into a sachet, and tucked it into my drawer. The blue was no longer just shame. It had become a keepsake of truth. Each morning afterward, I built new routines, driving to night classes, sharing quiet dinners with a friend who listened more than she spoke, reading to the children with honesty instead of half answers. When I stood at the window with a mug of tea, the street looked different, softer somehow. I realized dignity wasn't loud. It was steady, like the hum of the world continuing while I finally stood tall inside it. Healing did not arrive in one sweeping moment. It came in small fragments that stitched themselves together over time. At first, it was the silence of evenings without his footsteps, the house echoing in ways that felt both lonely and free. Then it was the steady rhythm of my own choices, cooking meals, the way I liked them, planting flowers in the yard without asking permission. breathing easier in rooms that no longer smelled of his cologne. The sachet of blue fabric lay hidden in my drawer, a reminder that truth cannot be scrubbed away. Some days I touched it and remembered the chaos, the humiliation, the collapse. Other days I touched it and felt only gratitude that I had survived it all. What I carried forward was not anger, but clarity. I learned that strength could be quiet, that revenge could transform into reclamation, that dignity was something no betrayal could steal once I chose to stand inside it. When I look back now, I see not the woman who waited in silence, but the one who finally moved. I see the moment I decided the blue would not define my shame, it would define my proof. And that was enough.